The sun hung low in the sky as Tom ventured deeper into the forest, the lush greenery gradually swallowing the trail he'd been following. He had come here to escape the stress of city life, lured by the promise of serenity and the thrill of adventure. The forest was rumored to be a place where troubled souls had ended their lives, but Tom dismissed these tales as mere superstition. As twilight gave way to darkness, Tom realized he had lost his way. The trail had vanished, and with it, his sense of direction. He pulled out his map and flashlight, the beam piercing the encroaching shadows. Panic set in as he realized the futility of the map without recognizable landmarks. Tom trudged forward, hoping to find something familiar. The silence of the forest was unsettling. Every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs amplified in the stillness. Hours passed with no sign of an exit. Fatigue and fear began to creep in as he stumbled through the underbrush. Suddenly, he felt a presence, a sensation of being watched. He spun around, his flashlight sweeping through the trees but revealing nothing. The feeling persisted, an oppressive weight pressing down on him. His breath quickened, and he forced himself to move faster. The flashlight flickered. Tom slapped it, the light steadying for a moment before dimming again. As he walked, he heard footsteps behind him, matching his pace. He stopped, and the footsteps ceased. He turned, shining the weakening beam into the darkness. "Hello," he called, his voice echoing back to him. There was no reply, just the deafening silence. He continued, the footsteps resuming, always just a few steps behind. The flashlight flickered again, the beam narrowing to a feeble glow. Panic surged through him as the light finally died, plunging him into complete darkness. In the pitch black, Tom's other senses heightened. He heard whispering, faint at first, but growing louder, more insistent. The words were unintelligible, a cacophony of voices overlapping. He felt a chill in the air, a coldness that seemed to seep into his bones. Then he felt it, a cold hand on the back of his neck. He froze, his breath hitching in his throat. The touch was icy, the fingers long and bony. He could feel the weight of the hand, the unmistakable sensation of someone standing behind him. He spun around, swinging his arm to fend off whatever was there, but his hand passed through empty air. The whispers grew louder, circling him, mocking him. He stumbled backward, tripping over a root and falling to the ground. The cold hand returned, this time on his shoulder, its grip tightening. Tom scrambled to his feet, adrenaline fueling his movements. He ran blindly through the forest, the whispers and the cold hand following him. He could feel the presence closing in, the icy touch grazing his skin. Exhausted and terrified, he burst into a small clearing. The moonlight provided a faint, silvery illumination. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. The whispers ceased, the cold hand gone. The forest was silent once more, the oppressive weight lifted. As dawn approached, the first rays of sunlight pierced the canopy. Tom looked around, the forest now less menacing in the daylight. He rose to his feet and made his way toward the edge of the clearing, hoping to find his way out. In the light of day, he found the trail again, his relief palpable. He followed it back to his starting point, the forest's eerie atmosphere diminishing with each step. By the time he reached his car, the sun was fully risen, casting the forest in a warm golden light. Tom drove away, the events of the night replaying in his mind. He knew he had narrowly escaped something far worse than getting lost. The stories of the haunted forest, once dismissed as mere superstition, now held a chilling truth. He vowed never to return, haunted by the memory of the whispers, the cold hand, and the presence that had followed him through the darkness. John's hands tightened on the steering wheel as his car glided through the dark, empty road. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 2:14 a.m. The GPS had led him down this desolate stretch as a shortcut to his destination, promising to shave an hour off his travel time. But as the miles ticked by, the surrounding silence began to gnaw at his nerves. Suddenly, the engine sputtered. The car lurched, then died, rolling to a silent stop. John cursed under his breath and tried the ignition again. The engine whined but refused to start. He flicked on the hazard lights and stepped out into the chilly night air, the flashlight from his phone casting a feeble beam ahead. John popped the hood and peered inside, but his mechanical knowledge was minimal. Everything looked fine to his untrained eye. He leaned back, contemplating his next move, when he noticed the utter stillness around him. No rustling leaves, no distant calls of nocturnal animals, just an eerie, unnatural quiet. A shiver ran down his spine. He returned to the car and tried the ignition again. Still nothing. Frustrated, he grabbed his phone to call for help, only to find it had no signal. Panic began to creep in as he realized how isolated he truly was. As he sat in the driver's seat, contemplating his options, he heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping. He turned off the hazard lights and listened, the darkness now complete. The tapping grew louder, echoing through the night. It seemed to be coming from the trees just beyond the road. "Hello!" he called out, his voice trembling. No response. The tapping continued, now accompanied by a faint whispering. The words were indistinct, but carried a sinister edge, as if beckoning him closer. John grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of the car again, his pulse quickening. He moved towards the sound, the light from his phone barely piercing the darkness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, but he still couldn't make out the words. As he reached the edge of the trees, his flashlight flickered and died. Panic surged through him, and he turned to rush back to the car. But something caught his eye. A figure standing just beyond the tree line, its outline barely visible in the dim light. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice cracking. The figure didn't move. Instead, the whispers grew louder, the words now clear. "Join us. Join us." John stumbled backwards, tripping over a root and falling hard onto the road. Pain shot through his leg, but he scrambled to his feet and bolted towards the car. The whispers followed him, growing louder and more frantic. He flung himself into the driver's seat and locked the doors, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The tapping resumed, now against his window. He dared a glance and saw the figure standing just outside, its face obscured by shadow. The whispers filled the car, a cacophony of voices urging him to open the door, to step outside. John squeezed his eyes shut, covering his ears. "Go away! Leave me alone!" For what felt like hours, the tapping and whispers continued, relentless and maddening. He rocked back and forth, praying for the nightmare to end. Finally, as dawn's first light crept over the horizon, the noises ceased. John opened his eyes to find the figure gone, the forest silent once more. Tentatively, he turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life without hesitation. He didn't question it, didn't look back. He drove away, the rising sun casting long shadows on the road behind him. As he sped away from the eerie scene, John couldn't shake the feeling that he had narrowly escaped something far worse than a broken-down car. He resolved never to take shortcuts again, haunted by the memory of that night and the whispers that seemed to echo in his mind. "Join us. Join us." The argument with Emily had been fierce. John's anger had boiled over, his words sharp and cutting. Frustrated and fuming, he stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. The cool night air hit his face, but it did little to cool his temper. He walked aimlessly, his thoughts a tangled mess of rage and regret. After an hour of wandering, John realized he had no idea where he was. The streets had grown unfamiliar, the houses and shops giving way to overgrown fields and twisted trees. He checked his phone, but the battery was dead. Cursing his luck, he kept walking, hoping to find his way back to a recognizable road. Eventually, he reached a wrought iron gate, its rusted hinges creaking in the wind. He stopped and looked up, the moonlight casting eerie shadows across the sign. Evergreen Cemetery. A shiver ran down his spine as he recalled the stories he'd heard about this place. It was said to be haunted, a site of numerous tragic events, the most infamous being the death of a necrophile found mutilated among the graves. John hesitated, but his curiosity got the better of him. Pushing the gate open, he stepped into the graveyard. The gravel path crunched under his feet as he walked deeper into the cemetery, the moonlight barely illuminating the ancient tombstones. As he walked, a sudden feeling of unease washed over him. The air grew colder, and he could see his breath misting in the light. He rubbed his arms, trying to ward off the chill. The graveyard was deathly silent, the only sound the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. He stopped by an old mausoleum, its stone walls cracked and covered in ivy. A sense of dread settled over him as he realized just how isolated he was. Turning to leave, he felt a sudden resistance, as if an unseen force was holding him back. He stumbled, looking down to see a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the path. The figure was indistinct, a dark silhouette against the moonlit grass. John's heart pounded as he took a step back, his mind racing. The figure moved closer, its form becoming more defined. It was a man, his face twisted in a grotesque grin, eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. John tried to move, but his legs felt like lead. The figure continued to advance, its smile widening. Panic surged through John as he forced his legs to move, breaking into a run. He sprinted down the path, the figure's presence a constant pressure at his back. He darted between the tombstones, the shadows seeming to reach out for him. His breath came in ragged gasps as he rounded a corner, skidding to a halt when he saw the necrophile's grave marked by a weathered headstone. A feeling of overwhelming dread gripped him, and he knew he had to get out of there. As he turned to flee, he tripped over a gnarled root, falling hard onto the ground. Pain shot through his ankle, but he scrambled to his feet, limping towards the gate. The figure was closer now, its presence a suffocating weight. He could feel its cold breath on the back of his neck, its malevolent grin seared into his mind. Finally, he reached the gate, flinging it open and stumbling onto the road. He didn't stop running until he was far from the cemetery, the lights of the town finally coming into view. He slowed to a walk, his heart pounding, and glanced back to see the graveyard shrouded in darkness, the gate swinging shut. John made his way home, his anger forgotten, replaced by sheer terror. He reached his house and fumbled with his keys, finally managing to unlock the door. Emily was waiting, her face pale with worry. She rushed to him, but he could only shake his head, too shaken to speak. He never told her what happened that night, the memory too horrifying to relive. From that night on, John never ventured out after dark, especially near the cemetery. The image of the figure and its grotesque grin haunted his dreams, a constant reminder of the harrowing encounter in Evergreen Cemetery.